Hi guys, Irish Footy Vlogs. Delighted to welcome James Clancy back to talk about Cork City once more. James, you were on before and you gave us your 1 to 11 actually in Cork City, which was fantastic.
Thanks, Keith. It was a pleasure to join you, and I'm looking forward to joining you again today.
Excellent stuff, excellent stuff. We get into Cork and their ownership, I suppose. First of all, James, during the week, the Friends of the Rebel Army Society, aka Forest, publicly backed a yes vote that sees Grovemore Limited. That's how you pronounce it, isn't it?
Correct, Grovemore, yeah.
Yeah, they're taking over the club. Obviously, Trevor Hemmings, who owns Preston, controls that company. James, they bought the club for €1, but of course they're paying off the existing debts as well at the club as well, aren't they? I suppose the first thing to say is if you could explain for us and why they took over the club as such, you know what I mean, fan ownership and all that. In I think it was 2011. Is that right, James?
Well, the Forest was initially started in 2008 to sort of see over the runnings of the club. And then the club had huge financial difficulties. It was late 2008 into 2009, and it looked like the club was going to fold. It looked like the club was going to cease to exist. So late 2009, the club was in the High Court, and it was literally within hours of being wound up. But the Forest body came together to take ownership of the club. And Forest came into existence as owner of the club, an entirely fan-owned club in early 2010. I was literally, I think it was barely a week, it might have been 10 days, the club had to get players together and start off in the first division. And the first game was against Derry, and there was literally 13 players went up on the bus. If memory serves, the kitman at the time, Mick Ring, he almost got a game because there was such a lack of players. But anyway, got through the 2010 season in the first division, and of course then got promoted back to the Premier Division at the end of the 2011 season. You probably remember yourself the famous Graham Cummins goal against Shells, and obviously it was a little bit extra sweet because it was against Shells, who there'd be no love lost with,
Absolutely. In your opinion, though, like if we go back to that time, actually, James, was that the right thing at the time for you?
I think it was the right thing, all right. Like I remember the investment company Archiga, they took over the club. What was it? It was around summer 2008. I remember there was, I won't name any names, but there was a meeting in Cork City, and obviously everybody involved, supporters, etc., were at the meeting, stakeholders, etc. But there was one of the head people of Archiga said they were going to invest €30 million in the club, and people basically started laughing, because you're not, it's not really going to happen, within 6 or 7 months, players were going months without having their wages paid. And that was going through Christmas and stuff, and so like something needed to be sort of done, but everything kind of came together. And again, like I said, the Forest, the fans group officially took over the club in 2010.
Did you see any issues down the road with Forest, or did you think that, now that they're fan owned, that Cork should find themselves in so much bother again, or what was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the mission at the time, the mission back in 2010 was that the club was to safeguard the club for the future, and that the club would never be in a situation again where the club would be relying on mega rich investors. But I suppose, obviously there's limits as to how far a fan-owned club can take a club. Like, reaching the group stages of Europe with a fan-owned club is very unlikely, because the finances just aren't there, sort of. And I suppose at the moment the current debts are sort of €200,000 in and around that. And like, ordinarily speaking, it's not a huge amount, but like obviously the Cork City is generally the best supported club in the country. Obviously, when Dundalk and Shamrock Rovers are doing well, they've got great attendances. But the main source of income for the club is match day revenue. And obviously, with the current restrictions, there's zero match day revenue. So Forest just can't pay off a debt that's six figures,
When did you see problems arising? Was it a year ago? You know what I mean? 6 months ago? Where did you see the problem
It
start?
would have been. It would have been as early as, I suppose, yeah, maybe late in the 2018 season, early 2019. You know, I remember John Coffey was still been in charge, and obviously John Coffey was a great manager for City. But you know, there definitely there was excesses in terms of expenditure. I remember there was famously at one stage there were six. The club had six right backs in the first team, and it was like, you know, so there was like there was almost two or three players for every position, and obviously these guys are on decent wages and stuff, and again, you know, you're kind of spending beyond your means, you know.
And of course, contracts as well. There wouldn't have been
Exactly. Yeah.
isn't that true?
Yeah.
You know, where a lot of Cork City fans think to themselves, James, you know, where did the Sean Maguire money go, etc., and maybe a bit of money for other players as well. How would you answer that?
That's a good question. Like Shawnee Maguire was only sold for 150,000, and like, you know, realistically, that sort of money doesn't go hugely far, and it would be a bugbear with fans. Like, he should have been sold for a lot more. Like, I think the League of Ireland record is, I think it's still Roy O'Donovan to Sunderland, 500,000 euro. That was back in 2006. I think that's still the record, and Shawnee Maguire should have been going for that sort of number when you consider like he scored 20 goals, 20 league goals in 2017 in the first 21, 22 games, obviously phenomenal. Like, so you like, you know, but like obviously there were sell-on clauses, and like obviously, for obviously Cork City fans would be aware of this, but for people who aren't aware, just before the 2020 season started, it looked like the club wouldn't get a license, and would effectively go out of business. So I'm sure you're aware of this, that Trevor Hemmings and Grovemore came along, and they bought the sell-on clauses for Shawnee Maguire and Kevin O'Connor, sorry, and Alan Brown, and that money was effectively what allowed Cork City to get the license for 2020. Otherwise, the club would have ceased to exist. So obviously, the club stayed in touch, and Grovemore there were discussions about having the option to buy City. This was at the start of the 2020 season, around late February, early March, and like obviously those talks were kind of hindered with COVID restrictions and blah blah. But now that the season is over, things are as nearly over. Things are sort of obviously coming to fruition, and obviously the vote was last Wednesday night that the Force have decided to give Grovemore and Trevor Hemmings the option of taking over the club. It looks like it will go through. It hasn't quite gone through yet, but over the next maybe 3 to 4 weeks, things need to be sort of, you know, hurried, because the application for the license for next season is already underway. So, you know, things will need to be kind of finalized within the next maybe month to 5 weeks at the most.
Yeah, this has been going on a while, hasn't it? Like, obviously,
It has been, yeah.
Interested for quite some time, hasn't he?
Yeah, like I suppose the first link to from Cork City to Preston would have been Graham Cummins joining Preston back in just after the end of the 2011 season, and there's been several players like Adam O'Reilly and obviously Alan Brown, Shawnee Maguire, and Kevin O'Connor that they've joined Preston from Cork City, and there's a few players. There's a Munster Senior League club in Cork, Ringmahon Rangers. Preston have taken several of their players, and the Preston have been so pleased with them that they have basically an almost an agreement between the two clubs, and obviously now something similar to that. It's not confirmed, but I believe that is what will happen. Like obviously, you know, some players will now likely go from City. It'll be an easy voyage. It'll be an easy, you know, transaction to go from Cork City to Preston, and of course the other way around as well.
Not been too cynical. Do you think that's in Hemmings' thoughts? That's in his, you know, forefront of thoughts when it comes to buying Cork City, or how do you think, you know, he sees Cork City?
Well, Hemmings has a lot. I appreciate that point. I would have been very skeptical of Hemmings' motives, but there's more and more information is coming through, and he has a lot of links to Cork. He owns Trebalgan Holiday Resort, and he has stud farms. So the optimist in me thinks that he sees some familiarity with Cork City FC. Of course, there's also a possibility that he views Cork City FC as a feeder club for Preston, and that obviously if they have a chance of promotion to the Premier League, he's going to be taking City's best players for nothing. But they've expressed they've expressed some interest in, we'll say, like obviously Turner's Cross Stadium is still only, it's obviously it's been leased from the Munster Football Association. Grovemore have expressed an interest in buying the stadium, so that suggests that they have medium to long term interest in the club.
Yeah, and of course as well, Cork could take advantage the other way. They might be able to receive 1 or 2 loan players from Preston as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. So yeah, but obviously, I wouldn't be overly optimistic about it either. Like I look at Preston, and it's a well-run club. It's a community-based club, and obviously Cork City is community-based as well. However, Preston got promoted to the Championship in 2015, and like considering Trevor Hemming's resources, like he's a billionaire. He's worth well over £1 billion. He could have invested the sort of money that would get Preston promoted to the Premier League, and since 2015, they've never been particularly close to promotion to the Premier League. So I think he's obviously a shrewd investor. I don't expect him to be investing millions in Cork City. But again, it remains to be seen.
Do you see him though? That's actually a good point, actually, because you can look at Preston and see how much they've spent and all that kind of thing, and obviously, he hasn't spent an awful lot in terms of the money he has. But when you look at it again, would you see maybe Cork City spending the kind of money that maybe, say, Kelleher does at St. Pat's? Like, obviously, like not Shamrock Rovers, not Dundalk, maybe, but that kind of region.
I would think it would be something like that. Like, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon that City will be competing with Dundalk and Shamrock Rovers. But I do think it's something that Hemmings will monitor closely. And yeah, again, it may be like a St. Pat's. There will be some investment. I do think now that next season, I'd be surprised if City don't get promoted back next season back to the Premier Division, and then maybe within a few years, if the crowds are coming back and like Grovemore can see that there is some bit of money in it, that they might invest more, and like obviously within a few seasons, it will be in their best interests for City to be pushing towards Europe. So I do see them investing some money, but whether it'll be the sort of money that the likes of Dundalk or Shamrock Rovers have, I'd be sceptical.
Especially when he hasn't put that kind of money as such into Preston North End.
Exactly.
And you said you see Cork City coming back next season, but do you think they'll invest much in the squad in the first division, or do you think they'll have a look at it and say, let's get back to the Premier Division with generally what we have? I don't mean what we have, because a lot of players are going to leave Cork. We've already seen the loanees gone back. You'd expect that. But do you think that kind of a youth scenario, a youth policy there, and not invest too much in the players and try and get back up with that kind of squad and then invest? Or do you think just go and invest immediately?
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of youth players, and what's also worth noting is that every Cork City player is out of contract at the end of the season. At the end of this season, so obviously there's going to be a lot of negotiations over the winter, and what people might forget as well is that the first division is largely part-time, so you don't need to invest a fortune to be sort of up thereabouts, competing for promotion, etc. So I would expect some investment, and I do think, or I like to think, that Grovemore are thinking, okay, there's not huge money in the League of Ireland unless obviously you're in Europe and competing in Europe, and there's very, very, very little money in the first division, if anything at all. So if you want to make any money in the League of Ireland, you have to be in the Premier Division. So I like to think Grovemore will invest enough, which wouldn't be much, that they'll invest enough so as to be thereabouts next season.
Would you expect most of the first team players to actually leave Cork ultimately?
That's a good question. I think people like Errol Morrissey will stay. I think the Cork lads will stay, but the likes of Dylan McLeod, he's from Dublin. I wouldn't be overly optimistic. It's going to be it'll be fairly Cork, because realistically, most players don't really want to be in the first division. It's not really a great shop window.
There is quite a few decent Cork players that are coming through the ranks, isn't there? You've got Slevin, isn't he from Cork?
He's Slevin's from Cork, yeah.
Cork, you've got the names pronunciations here are terrible. Is it up front or?
Denanga, yeah, he's very.
I take Nakbro, isn't it as well?
Nakbro, yeah.
So,
and
not very James, but
yeah. But yeah, there's Kid Elliott is obviously gone, and Joseph Olo, he went back to Arsenal there a couple of days ago. But again, yeah, like obviously, like Colin Healy now is in charge.
As well. Alec Byrne and players of that as well.
Alec Byrne, yeah. But I what's that?
O'Brien at centre half, is that right?
Yeah. That's and like. Exactly, yeah. And Colin Healy will be in charge of the academy, so I would expect several players to come through the academy. But I think this season sort of showed that you need more of a mix of kind of experience and youth. Like there was so many young players. There was something like that. Most of the majority of the players, they were like players that weren't getting game time in England, and they were sort of taken over to City on to get kind of senior game time, and like. Several of them were maybe they just weren't experienced enough, and like there was some very naive goals conceded. I'm not going to sort of name names, but like again, like I would think that Grovemore will look to maybe recruit some more sort of experienced players, and again, obviously there'll be a mix, but again, it's hard to say exactly because number one, the takeover hasn't fully gone through, and number two, it's not really particularly clear how much will be invested. So, but I'm sure having observed people will in charge will kind of come to the conclusion that there needs to be a bit more experience next season.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because there's a couple of players at Cove who are pretty talented. I wonder if Cork will look to get some of them in as well.
Yeah, maybe the likes of John Kavanagh and Ian Turner, they would both have been at City in the past, and they're both very experienced now. Like Kavanagh is mid-20s and Ian Turner is 30-31, and they've had good seasons with Cove. So I think are both of them out of contract now? They could be.
Yeah, I think a lot of them would be out of contract. Another player I'd throw in is actually Dave Hurley because I think he's a Cork man as well, a City man.
Cork, yeah. He's had a good season with Cove as well, and he's just come back from injury. So I think. But that's having said that as well. Having said that as well, obviously there's quite a rivalry between Cove and Cork City. So they'd be in the same division. So would like if Cork City was still in the Premier Division, obviously it'd be an attractive proposition to go from Cove to Cork City. But the fact that City will be in the first division might mean it's less of an attractive proposition. But then obviously, like if the takeover does go through, there's a lot of potential in Cork City. So obviously, Cove doesn't have a billionaire backer. So obviously, there is more potential in Cork City. So there would be a likelihood of players going from Cove to Cork City.
In terms of management, do you see an experienced manager coming into Cork City, or is that something you prefer to see as a whole?
Yeah, I would think so. I think somebody like Alan Reynolds could be interesting. I think he's been in and around the league for so long, and especially in the Munster area, Cork City. He's played for Cork City. He's managed Waterford. I think he could be a very good choice. And obviously somebody like Stuart Ashton as well. He's done very well at Ramblers with not much resources, and he's obviously familiar with Cork City. Colin Healy's obviously in charge at the moment on an interim basis. I think, from what I know, I think he prefers working underage and bringing players through. And like I kind of look at it worst case scenario, if City aren't sort of doing well and he loses his job as a senior first team manager in the middle of next season, would that mean he's gone from the club? So I would envisage Colin Healy going back maybe to the under-19s for 2021. I could be wrong, but again, if I had a choice here and now, I'd probably say somebody like Alan Reynolds.
Yeah, best case scenario, I suppose, for Colin Healy. You want to keep the likes of him at the club as well, don't you?
Yeah.
A bit of sympathy for Neil Fenn, though.
I would, yeah. I sort of like the club's budget was for the 2020 season was hugely reduced, and like he was kind of cutting his cloth to measure. And like I remember Joe Gamble said recently, he said that there's no other club that the assistant manager is also the strength and conditioning coach. Like so, like there was multiple people in the backroom team doing multiple jobs, so it wasn't ideal, you know. And as I said, with under Neil Fenn, like obviously he has close contacts in the UK. He was taking players from UK academies, very young players, like still teenagers that had the, you know, like I said earlier, they didn't sort of have senior first team adult experience, and like a sizable proportion of the team this 2020 season would have been, like I said, they didn't have experience. You know, there was still maybe a bit lightweight physically, and you know, like that's the thing about League of Ireland football. You know, you need to be physically kind of strong. You know, so several players just, you know, they maybe didn't have that experience, physical strength, etc. So I certainly would I feel some sympathy for Neil Fenn. Should he have been kept on for, say, for maybe for 2021? Like he was barely in charge of the club for a year. Yeah, I think he probably deserved another season. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I
Yeah.
think you touched on it there with the young players as well coming abroad into the league, and you know some of them can be quite talented, but it's not easy coming into the League of Ireland. I just wonder to myself, this is just a general statement, I wonder to myself sometimes that young players that come from the likes of Scotland and England, they kind of think the League of Ireland, oh, it's no problem, we'll be fine here. But you see an awful lot of them struggling actually in the Premier Division, don't you? And as you said, Cork, unfortunately for Cork, most of them were, you know, miss rather than hit, weren't they? Really.
That's true. Like I think a lot of these players they get they get a bit of a shock. Like, you know, it's more physical than they realize. It's quicker than they're aware of. Like a few guys did well. I thought Joseph Olo did well, and again Ricardo Jananga. Ricardo Jananga very fast, and he could beat a man, etc. But most of them, like I said, maybe a bit lightweight, maybe a bit young, and you know, I suppose whether you like it or not, they didn't quite work out as I suppose the league table sort of showed.
I think with Lou as well, you're unlucky because he got injured at
He got injured. Yeah, that was back in March, and he didn't come back until it was like a few games into the restart.
Yeah, and by that point as well, like he's trying to get up to fitness and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, he maybe didn't quite have full match fitness. Yeah, yeah.
Coming into a battle. I think the other thing that was against Neil Fenn is that I think we mentioned this before and we spoke before is that, you know, most teams in this league are reasonably strong. There isn't a really, really, really weak team in the league. We've seen Finn Harps in the last few weeks really kick into gear as well and look quite strong. They look like a team that, you know, they wouldn't be miles away from a European slot in terms of the quality compared to the rest. So I think that was a difficult one for Cork City too. You were hoping that maybe someone would be reasonably weak, and unfortunately they weren't from Cork
That's a
City.
good. That's a good point. Yeah, I think there was no sort of very weak team in the league this season. Like I'm not really fully aware of what happened to Finn Harps earlier in the season, but they've been phenomenal the last few weeks. I think if the season went on another 5 or 6 games, I think they'd be really pushing for Europe. And obviously, I think a lot of it is Ollie Horgan. I think he's a really good manager, and you know, I think he could manage a team. Like realistically, Harps are unlikely to ever be competing for Europe. But I think he could manage a team maybe at a higher level. You know, but yeah, like I said, or like you said, you know, I was hoping at the start of the season that maybe Shelburne, having just gotten promoted, that it might be a tough season for them. But you know, they've recruited some very experienced players, like the likes of Kieran Kilduff and players like that, and Brennan, and they've been very. I know they were hammered yesterday by Athlone, but they've been very competitive generally throughout the season. And yeah, like you said, there's been no really weak team, and realistically, this season Cork City were just that bit below everybody else in the league.
Yeah, exactly. Look, James, hopefully we keep Cork City back in the Premier Division next season because they're a huge club. And personally, I didn't want them to go down, but unfortunately, someone had to go down. And I guess, you know, they deserve to go down in the end, to be fair, didn't they?
Yeah, over the whole season, like that's the thing. Like, I mean, it's only been an 18-game season, and as it is, Cork City are already are as it stands. I think City are like because of last week's results, City are 7 points adrift of safety. So in such a shortened season, like this, when the gap is that much, the league table is, especially when it's such a short season, the league table doesn't really lie. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks very much, James. Really appreciate it. Great info.
No problem, Keith. All the best. Chat to you soon.
Bye.